There was something that seemed perfect, yet an inner voice suggested it wasn't that simple. For years, the dream of a quiet, peaceful home, far from the city's hustle, where one could find solace and meaning, had pursued her. However, when that house first appeared before her eyes, an inexplicable hesitation arose. Instead of the anticipated delight and happiness, a sense of unease and doubt crept into her heart. Is this truly where I ran to? Martin's suggestion of moving abroad felt like an open door, and her consent was given without hesitation, as if it were the only right decision. The idea of escaping the city's routine, which seemed to have consumed her life, felt like salvation. Thus began the search for a home that would reflect her vision of the future, a quiet corner where lost connections could be restored, where Saturday evenings were filled with laughter, and life's difficulties didn't seem insurmountable. It seemed such a place existed, and that this house could provide what she so desperately lacked. Eventually, the ideal home was found, an imposing building with enormous windows, as if inviting the sun inside. The view from the windows offered a sense of serenity, as if nature itself had become an ally. Spacious and bright, it seemed the embodiment of a dream, a place to be oneself, far from the urban chaos. During the first visit, the world around them quieted, leaving only a welcoming silence that, for a moment, instilled a belief in harmony. It felt as though an eternity lay ahead, but it was merely an illusion. Martin, initially inspired by the changes and new challenges of life on the outskirts, soon became re-immersed in his work. Devoting himself to it completely, he left more and more room for solitude. The house, though beautiful and tidy, grew increasingly empty. Was this truly what they had sought for so long? The paradox was that the place meant to be the embodiment of her dream had disappointed her. As they packed their belongings, the silence in the house became increasingly oppressive. But there was something more, something that prevented her from simply ignoring what was happening. Even in solitude, the house offered a strange sense of comfort. The soft light and the muffled sound of wind rustling leaves outside the window seemed to whisper of a coming discovery. Of something that could fill the void, something yet unrealized, but waiting for its moment. It was then that their neighbor, Victor, who lived across the street, appeared. From the first glance, she had a feeling this man would play an important role in her life. Tall, with graying hair, he exuded an infectious energy that transcended any barriers. There was a lightness to his way of life, something appealing and comforting. He seemed to be in no hurry, truly present in the moment. Unexpectedly, he offered help, which at that moment felt both strange and welcome. Such genuine sincerity was rare in the bustling city life. Victor asked if they were new to the area, and that question became the start of a conversation that quickly grew into something more. Yes, we just moved in, they replied, smiling shyly. Victor's gaze seemed perceptive, as if he knew more than they had told him. Their friendship began easily and naturally. Victor, with his calm demeanor and willingness to help, was disarming. When the kitchen grill broke, it was he who came to their aid with tools and his perpetual smile. His unflappability and ability to not dwell on details momentarily lightened life's burden. The house, with its empty rooms, felt a little more alive. It's just a small problem, he said, tinkering with something, and these words instilled a sense of calm, as if all problems were merely minor issues needing solutions, not insurmountable obstacles. Watching Victor, she admired his ability to enjoy life, unlike the perpetually busy and stressed Martin. When the grill was fixed, she sincerely thanked their neighbor. Martin is always so busy, we couldn't have managed without your help. Victor smiled with quiet kindness and replied. Julia could always count on Victor's support, and from that moment, his visits became an integral part of her life. He would drop by to share his current affairs and projects. These conversations, seemingly simple and unassuming, sparked a keen interest and anticipation in Julia. In her home, where an atmosphere of detachment prevailed with Martin, she lacked something important, perhaps even herself. But in Victor's company, time seemed to slow down, and the world around her took on new colors and depth. His presence became familiar, pleasant, and even comforting. Julia realized that these conversations might only be an expression of friendship, but something more was stirring in her heart, something she could no longer ignore. something that gave her a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. In Victor's gestures, in his gaze, in his care for her, there was something that touched her deeply. But how far could this friendship go? Julia felt there was something more between them but didn't want to admit it to herself. She was tormented by doubts, and the more she thought about it, the more she was drawn to Victor, the more lost she became in an ocean of conflicting emotions. There was something irresistible about Victor. When he first appeared in her life, Julia didn't know what to expect. But his calm and confident aura stood out against the hustle and frantic pace of her everyday life. He wasn't just a friendly neighbor, he was a man who seemed to understand her without words. At first, Julia thought it was just a casual friendship, born out of their proximity. But soon, she realized there was an energy between them that was impossible to ignore. She found herself looking forward to their meetings and casual conversations, like a breath of fresh air in her stressful day. Julia tried to rationalize her feelings, convincing herself that Victor was just a good neighbor to talk to when Martin was too busy. But the more time she spent with Victor, the more he permeated her life. His visits became almost daily, and imperceptibly, Julia began to feel a need for his presence, his curiosity, and his energy. Their friendship began easily and naturally. Victor, with his gregariousness and calm, helped Julia forget her daily worries. She admired his thoroughness and ease in working on projects. Unlike Martin, who was always rushing and consumed by emails and obligations, Victor knew how to stop time and enjoy the moment. His words sounded almost sensual, and his tone always captivated Julia's attention. One day, Victor came to her home with a design project idea. They spent hours discussing how to combine different styles and create something modern and cozy. Julia was completely absorbed in the conversation and details, and at that moment, she realized she saw Victor as more than just a colleague or friend. He smiled at her, and his eyes sparkled as if he were genuinely interested in her opinion. Julia felt important, as if her every word mattered. Victor's magnetism was not only physical but something much deeper, something that drew her against her will. He knew exactly when to joke to lighten the mood and when to simply gaze at her longer than he should. Julia began to wonder about the boundaries of this friendship. Despite being married to Martin, Victor awakened a need in her that she hadn't even suspected. Changes were happening within her that she couldn't deny. She found herself waiting for the doorbell to ring. Will Victor come today, she thought, tidying the house and trying to distract herself. When he didn't come, she felt a void. It wasn't just about help with projects or decorating advice. Victor looked at her as if she were more than just a neighbor, and with each passing day, it became harder for Julia to ignore that gaze. When their eyes met, a certain electricity arose in the air that made her feel alive. She convinced herself it was just friendship, that there was nothing wrong with appreciating Victor as a person and discussing projects, life, and everything else with him. When Martin was, as usual, consumed by work, Julia tried to convince herself that her friendship with Victor was a healthy way to fill the emptiness and occupy her mind. However, deep down, she knew that the line between friendship and something more was thinning. In those days, when Victor visited her to discuss joint projects, his presence became increasingly palpable. This manifested in subtle but very real signs of attention. Accidental brushes of shoulders while exchanging ideas seemed to spark with tension, that very chemistry Julia was unsuccessfully trying to ignore. The air around them seemed to thicken, permeated by unspoken desires. Victor's gaze became more and more intense and scrutinizing, and, to Julia's horror, instead of pulling away, she felt an irresistible pull towards him. It became increasingly difficult for her to distinguish simple sympathy from something much greater, from a force she could no longer deny. One evening, after a stressful workday, with Martin still delayed at the office, Victor appeared. Under the pretext of discussing a new project idea, he initiated a conversation that quickly shifted to a more intimate level. His voice was softer and quieter, and a palpable tension hung in the air between them both. At some point, their gazes met for a moment longer than usual, and Julia realized that something had changed. The line between permissible and forbidden had been crossed, and despite all her attempts to resist, something inside her urged her to yield to this attraction. After that conversation, Victor looked at Julia differently. His gaze no longer held friendly detachment but a deep and intense desire. She recognized his intentions and knew she couldn't ignore what was happening. He moved closer to her and whispered almost tenderly, "You do understand, Julia, that there could be something more between us?" Her hands trembled slightly, and the warmth of his body and the closeness of his presence made it hard for her to breathe. Victor was testing her boundaries, and for a moment, Julia was lost, unsure whether to retreat or let this tension resolve itself. What would happen if she allowed this desire to take hold of her? Could she turn back, or would they both get lost in this dangerous game? As Victor began to appear more frequently, not just for work matters but under increasingly personal pretexts, Julia's heart became more and more entangled with thoughts of the possibility of something more than just friendship. His visits ceased to be fleeting, he lingered, and the silence between them no longer felt awkward, but rather, was filled with a tension that only intensified her desire. His presence ignited a fire within her that she hadn't even suspected. This invisible fire slowly spread, penetrating where she least expected it. Every conversation now seemed more intimate, their gazes met longer, as if words were merely a pretext for something more. Julia was captivated by how Victor understood her every word, as if her every utterance was valuable, as if he carefully observed her every movement, even her gestures. And in every small detail, she felt that something more was happening between them, something that began to dangerously dominate her. No matter how Victor tried to conceal his intentions, the truth was obvious, he was playing with her, and she didn't know how to control it. When Victor asked her to show him her personal ideas for the house project, the tone of the conversation changed. It was no longer just about working together, but about her, about them. He looked at her with a penetrating gaze, trying to see beyond the professional facade she presented. He made her feel that her work, her soul, deserved more than a superficial glance from outsiders. It was a touch not only physical but deeply emotional. And when Victor shared his ideas, Julia realized he was challenging her, pushing her into a dangerous zone where emotions blended with desire. As Victor spoke about his life, his ambitions, and his projects, his voice held a special, soft melody that inexplicably captivated Julia. She tried to resist, convincing herself that they were just discussing work. But something was happening, a small gesture, a quiet word, and she could no longer distinguish between reality and the fantasy created between the lines of their daily interactions. One night, everything changed. Victor appeared without warning, which was becoming customary, but this time something special hung in the air. He stood closer than usual, their shoulders almost touching, and something about him felt so familiar, as if they shared much more than a few casual conversations. Julia went to the kitchen for water, and returning, she felt the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air seemed to thicken, filled with something she couldn't define, but which she was beginning to feel with full intensity. A tension hung in the air as he uttered the name Julia in a soft but confident tone that sent a slight shiver down her body. "Have you ever considered, Julia, the prospect that our partnership could grow into something more than just a professional relationship?" The question rang out, making her heart stop, though she tried to hide her confusion. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to cease to exist. Like a harbinger of an approaching storm, she felt something momentous was coming. "I don't quite understand what you mean," she whispered, but he seemed to unerringly grasp the hidden meaning of her words. That night, desire seemed to materialize in the air. He moved closer, and without extra words, his hand touched her skin with such tenderness, as if a flame had touched her. Warmth surged through her body, and excitement engulfed her. Her body seemed to know what she herself refused to admit. The tension between them became almost physical, and to yield to it, as he leaned closer, was incomprehensibly easy. His lips touched her forehead, as if sealing a promise that words were no longer needed. But something inside her desperately screamed, urging her to retreat before it was too late. The harder she tried to resist, the stronger the desire burned. He looked at her again, but now his gaze held something she had never seen before, not the slightest hint of pretense remained. It seemed he wanted to tell her what she already knew deep down. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, and these words caused a storm of contradictions in her soul. Guilt intertwined with desire, creating an unbearable, yet exhilarating, mixture. She pulled away, but her thoughts were consumed by memories of the moments they had shared, of how he looked at her as if she were the only important person in his life. And worst of all, for a moment, she wanted that to be true. She wanted him to be the answer that would fill the emptiness she never knew how to fill. In the next moment, she gave in to the impulse, unable to control herself. He leaned in to kiss her, and she, not realizing how it happened, did not pull away. She responded to the kiss, without thinking about the consequences. This kiss was full of tenderness. It wasn't just an exchange of feelings, it was intense and insistent, as if time was working against them. Her mind desperately screamed, urging her to stop, but the desire that consumed her body was stronger. She lost all sense of what was right. She completely dissolved into that moment. The kiss grew more passionate, and the world around them seemed to cease to exist, leaving only the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Something inside her told her that life would never be the same. What they had, or what they thought they had, was now changed forever. She looked at him, still speechless, and he simply smiled, a smile full of unsaid words. "I know this is wrong," he said, but his voice was so soft and seductive that the words lost their meaning. "But I can't hide my feelings for you anymore." She knew that in some ways he was right. Moreover, she felt the same. But she also realized that she was destroying something that could never be restored. She was torn between overwhelming desire and a tormenting sense of guilt. How could she live with this? How could she face reality, having succumbed to this attraction? And what would happen when the lie she had so carefully built, the facade of her perfect life, crumbled? She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. But would it already be too late to turn back? When Martin returned home that night, there was something subtle in the air. He didn't know what had happened, but she understood that he felt a change. Her behavior, her gaze, the way he now looked at her, everything was different. The tension between them became palpable, like a taut string ready to snap at any moment. He entered the house, as usual, looking tired, but his eyes searched her for something he couldn't comprehend. And she knew what he was looking for, but didn't know how to reveal the truth to him. She wanted to run, to hide from it all, but at the same time, she couldn't. She could no longer deny what had happened, what was happening, what she felt. When he looked at her with such a piercing gaze, her breath caught. It was a mixture of fear and guilt, a feeling that if he knew what she had done, everything would collapse. Perhaps it was already too late. Something had changed between them, because deep down she knew that something inside her had already changed forever, something that could not be fixed, something she didn't know how to confess but was about to expose. For the first few minutes, they were silent. She sat in the living room, and he stood, as if not knowing what to do, as if he felt something was missing but couldn't pinpoint what. The heavy silence between them was deafening. And suddenly, like a shot without warning, he asked in a voice she had never heard before, different, charged with pure truth, "What's going on, Julia? You've become so distant, so different, as if I'm no longer part of what's happening with you. What's between us?" She looked at him, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed able to express what she felt. She wanted to scream, to lay it all out, to confess what had happened with Victor. But she knew that by doing so, she would destroy everything. So she simply said what seemed safest, a lie so fragile it could crumble at the slightest touch. "I'm just tired, Martin. Just exhaustion, work, the move, the time spent apart, it's all too much for me." He didn't answer immediately, but his eyes fixed on her, as if trying to see something more than her words. He knew she was hiding something. He knew there was something more, and worst of all, he already suspected it. It was as if he felt the rift between them even before she herself acknowledged it. And then he spoke. Words burst from his lips like a hidden accusation, something so sharp it cut through the air. "You're with him, aren't you? With Victor?" Something in her face, something in how she had changed since Victor entered her life, gave her away completely. Reality could no longer be ignored. She was completely exposed. The weight of guilt crushed her, and the tension between them became an unbearable burden. She could no longer deny the truth, neither to him nor to herself. She had betrayed him, and he knew it. She had hurt him in a way she never imagined she was capable of. The man with whom she had spent so many years, with whom she had built a life, was now shattered into pieces, all because of her. "How could you?" he asked, as if choking on the pain. She had thought their bond was stronger than this. She wondered what had happened to the love they once shared, to the promises of a future together. Worst of all, he wasn't the only one asking that question. She was too. How had she come to this? How could she allow a simple mistake to escalate into something so massive and irreparable? Tears streamed down her cheeks, but words seemed stuck in her throat. There was no single expression that could atone for what she had done. Julia could no longer bear his gaze, her only wish was to run, to dissolve into nothingness. But there was no retreat. The truth stood exposed in all its stark nakedness, and hiding it was no longer possible. Martin sharply rose from the armchair, his movements betraying a storm of emotions, as if words and feelings had crashed down on him with a heavy weight. He paced the room, clenching his hands frantically, as if trying to rein in his inner chaos. Julia watched as pain consumed him, and she didn't know how to stop this destructive wave. She had destroyed him, and the realization of the irreversibility of her actions tormented her soul. I don't know what to do now, Julia. I believed that together we would overcome any difficulties, that our love was unbreakable. But now, I see only lies and betrayal. I can't live like this. I just can't. His words pierced her like sharp daggers. She understood he was right. Her action was unforgivable, and no excuses could soften his pain. She didn't even dare to ask for forgiveness, for nothing could erase what had happened. And what was even worse, she wasn't sure if she wanted to. Deep in her heart, despite her pangs of conscience, lay an unwillingness to return to her old life. She had crossed a line, and perhaps subconsciously understood that there was no turning back. "Martin, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did, and now I don't know what to do." He looked at her with an alienated gaze, as if everything that connected them had evaporated, leaving only an empty shell of a marriage that, in essence, had never truly existed. Such deep pain was reflected in his eyes that it seemed to consume everything around them. He seemed to crumble into pieces right before her, and she felt guilty for each one. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look you in the eye again, Julia. What you did, I can't just forget. I can't pretend nothing happened." She knew he was right. What was broken could not be fixed. He had made his decision, and she had to make hers too, though she had no idea how she would cope with what lay ahead. When he said he needed time and couldn't live like this anymore, she knew it was the end. The end of her idealized world. Her life crumbled in an instant. A suffocating silence descended on the house. Only emptiness remained, which nothing could fill. The pain she had caused was the only reality in that moment. When he took his belongings and walked out the door, she knew he would never come back. She was no longer the woman he loved. She seemed to cease to exist. And when he left, the truth asserted itself in all its painful and final form. She had destroyed everything they had, everything they were, and now she was utterly alone. What would be left of her, of them? How would she live with this burden, with this pain? And could she ever forgive herself for all the destruction? The door closed behind Martin, and with it, an entire chapter of her life. She stood in the middle of the room, crushed by the weight of his departure. Nothing could be fixed, and she knew nothing would ever be the same. The pain was palpable, every breath was a painful reminder of what she had destroyed. It wasn't just about the marriage, but about her own identity. She found herself lost in a void, in a space that was once filled with life and hope, but was now utterly barren. Every corner of the house seemed to accuse her, reminding her of what could no longer be rectified. Loneliness descended upon her not as a quiet sadness, but as an aggressive wave that not only engulfed her but also disoriented her, leaving her unable to find a way out. Every hour seemed to stretch endlessly. She sat on the sofa, gazing at the empty space where Martin used to be, and the silence was deafening. The emptiness he left was filled only with a sense of regret that consumed her with each passing minute. How had she come to this? How could she allow something as trivial as a kiss to turn into a tsunami that destroyed everything? She spent days trying to cope with the pain of losing Martin, trying to understand what was left of her. But the truth was, somewhere deep down, she already knew there was no turning back. What happened with Victor wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to seek what she felt was missing. Ultimately, it forced her to realize what truly mattered. Yes, she had crossed a line with Victor, but it was her own boundary, a refusal to keep pretending, a discontent with what was. She sought something more vibrant, something that would make her feel alive again. In the process, she destroyed the only thing truly worthwhile, the love she still felt for Martin. The truth was, when he left, a part of her went with him. He took a piece of her that she knew she could never reclaim. Now, she stood at a crossroads. What to do next? How could she build a new life after demolishing everything she held dear? She had no answer. She didn't know what to do, or where to begin. The only thing she knew was that her life, her own life, would never be the same again. And in a way, she wasn't even sure if she wanted it to be. In the echoing silence of the house, her thoughts turned to recent events, prompting reflection on the future. The question inevitably arose, would she have the strength to move forward, and what remained of her former self after such upheaval? It became clear that ignoring past mistakes was no longer possible, nor was concealing the weight of guilt and the burden of betrayal. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a glimmer of hope for rebirth flickered, an opportunity to learn from her errors and, perhaps, return to her true self. As emptiness filled the space around her, an internal shift occurred. She realized the necessity of healing from her pain, for ultimately, only she could be her own savior. It no longer mattered what happened with Victor or how life would unfold with Martin. What truly mattered was how she would manage this pain and guilt. Still, this deep, all-consuming ache persisted, a constant reminder of every misstep, every missed moment. She had lost not just a husband or a lover, but also faith in herself. In the quiet of the house, she wondered, could she ever forgive herself? And like an echo, the answer came from the very walls, perhaps. Perhaps the path to forgiveness would be longer than anticipated. Perhaps to find forgiveness, she first needed to accept herself with all her mistakes and flaws. After all, no one is perfect, no one is immune to weaknesses and impulses. What truly mattered was what came next, the courage to keep learning and trying again. The future remained hazy. It was uncertain if she would find love again or if she could restore her relationship with Martin. But for now, she needed to move forward, one step at a time. Perhaps forgiveness would come with time, or perhaps not. But for now, it was crucial to learn to live with the consequences of her actions and choices. If there was a lesson to be learned, it was this: life isn't just about grand love, vibrant passions, and moments of pleasure. Life is a series of choices, moments of reflection and reevaluation. And above all, life is about forgiveness, both for others and for oneself.